For context, during the interwar years there was a rise in fascist governments, in Italy with Mussolini, and in Germany with Adolf Hitler, who had dreams of conquering all of Europe for the benefit of his pure Aryan race. Because the world leaders did not want to risk another world war, they held the Munich Conference, where they appeased Germany's request to infiltrate the Sudetenland and unify Germany from within. However, the overambitious German army went against their agreement with Britain, France, and the United States and invaded Poland, leading to World War II. The end of the war was brought about by the atomic bombs dropped on the Japanese cities of Nagasaki and Hiroshima in 1945. After the war, leaders wanted to focus on creating a single identity for Europe as a whole rather than individual countries to prevent antagonistic nationalism and future conflicts. Efforts towards global peace were on the rise with the creation of the United Nations to secure peaceful negotiations amongst the nations of the world. In addition, the European Union was established to create a European identity as opposed to the nationalist identity that caused conflict in World War II.
Ultimately, although post-World War II was an era of unification and prevention of conflict, Europe today is deviating from that trend and is on a path of further disunity and strife. This can be seen by the divide that the war in Ukraine has caused on the continent, through doubt and disunity from within the European Union, the effects of the Eurozone crisis, and more recently demonstrated in the Palestine and Israel conflict. The poll conducted by the European Council of Foreign Affairs illustrates a deepening disunification within Europe, as contrasting opinions on Russia's role in the continent highlight growing fractures among European nations. The European Council of Foreign Affairs is deeply involved with European society, as they have committed to building a stronger Europe in the face of challenge. Thus, we're able to conduct an accurate poll evaluating thousands of European people. In 2021, most European countries saw Russia as a necessary ally, but by 2023, following the invasion of Ukraine, the majority shifted to viewing Russia as a rival or an adversary. This polarization echoes the Cold War era, where Europe was starkly divided by the Iron Curtain, separating the pro-Western nations from those aligned with the Soviet Union. The current shift signifies not only a re-emergence of such divisions, but also suggests that a fully unified Europe remains an elusive goal. Just as the Iron Curtain isolated Eastern Europe, today's differing stances on Russia threaten to create new barriers. Seeing as Russia has no intention of backing down anytime soon, animosity towards the great power will only grow and hopes for a unified European continent will stretch further out of reach. The quote on top discusses how Russia has threatened European unity because of its imperialist ideas that have always been a threat to neighboring countries and has been unwilling to cooperate with other countries as a united entity, which was explained by Joseph Borrell, Vice President of the European Commission. If Russia continues to pursue its imperialist ambitions, tensions will always be prevalent in Eastern Europe, impeding the ability to politically unify Europe. In addition, the quote on the bottom explains that the conflict has exposed a divide between Western and Eastern Europe, due to their different experiences and perspectives because Eastern Europe has always been under the threat and imperialist practices of Russia. Until both sides can understand the other's experiences and perspectives, there will always be a divide between Western and Eastern Europe that will stand in the way of socially unifying Europe. The quote is from Judy Dempsey from the Carnegie Endowment of International Peace and was a diplomatic correspondent for the Financial Times, covering NATO and European Union enlargement. Therefore, she has experience covering discussions and activity in the European Union.
Brexit was when the United Kingdom left the European Union in 2020. The UK left because they felt the EU limited businesses too much by even regulating what a banana has to look like to be sold in the EU, and the source directly cites the commercial regulation of the EU. The UK also wanted to control their borders to prevent migrants and people coming to work, and because the majority of people weren't interested in the idea of a united Europe, this created a rift between Britain and the rest of Europe. Brexit has had many effects on the rest of Europe and within the UK. The chart on the left illustrates how different countries' economies would be disproportionately impacted by Britain's Brexit, which could cause divisions and frustrations. The chart is from the International Monetary Fund, an organization of 189 member countries that work to foster global monetary cooperation. Therefore, the source gets input from several different countries. The quote discusses how the effects of Brexit are still prevalent in Britain because there are large divisions within the UK between the states that wanted to stay in the EU and the other states that wanted to leave, as debates over Scottish independence also rise. Tensions and divisions within Europe and the call for independence in Scotland underscore the EU's struggle to maintain unity among its diverse member countries in terms of culture and ideologies. The source is from LSE, an academic webpage run by the London School of Economics and Political Science. Therefore, they are witnessing crises within the UK and have the ability to report on it. However, if Britain's leave proves to be successful in the long term, other countries in the EU may be pushed towards the direction of leaving, fracturing the EU's idea of a single European identity.
Piotr Burris, head of the European Council of European Relations in Warsaw, expresses a growing popular sentiment which regards the European Union as powerless and inadequate to maintain peace and security between nations. The response, or lack thereof, to the invasion of Ukraine signals to Burris and to the world the limitations of the EU's influence on international developments. Begging the question, if the European Union fails to contribute to international peace or even just the security of small nations, then what is the benefit for its members? The European Union faces a difficult challenge as they must contend with the differing priorities of the nations, with some opposing Russian invasion but also depending on Russian energy sources. This dilemma is reflected in the manner in which individuals debate the EU's place in all of this. Some argue that the European Union is simply being dogmatic and opting to resolve issues through dialogue, while others are more concerned with how this weakness presents itself to aggressive countries seeking more power. The image depicts a gathering of almost 500 people during a Freedom for the Children of UK event, an organization which has been linked to American QAnon theorists through slogans present during these rallies which directly reference QAnon conspiracy theories. QAnon followers generally believe in an underground child trafficking ring directly controlled or involving American Democratic Party members. This theory was first tracked back to 2017, but it spread to fringe political groups in the US and is now spreading all the way to Europe. One activist in the photo is wearing a shirt that says, out of many things, #Pizzagate is real, reference to a rumor spread during Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign that the Democratic Party had enslaved children in a Washington, D.C. pizza parlor. In the face of trends of escalating divides between the right and the left, many have pointed out that algorithms on social media may be driving people further and further down the rabbit hole of their own beliefs. Described as a sort of pipeline, social media can connect individuals to commentators, media, and other individuals with similar outlooks until they end up in an echo chamber which only works to recycle or intensify their own ideology. When this process is repeated, these political fringe groups are unable to compromise as they become distrustful of all media outlets or even the attentions of other side. This quote describes the potential divides which could stem from differing perspectives on equality and human rights. But in the face of an impasse such as LGBTQ rights for many nations, the EU and its perceived decrease in influence has had to water down their own regulations. In this case, Hungary and Poland threatened to veto, until the regulation was made so strict that evidence would have to clearly show misuse of EU funds, rather than just general actions contrary to EU ideals upholding liberalism. For many members, this may seem like a show of power for opposing members, as both the ideals they hold dear and the means by which they enforce them are being delegitimatized.
In this quote, Stefan Len communicates the uneven impact of the Eurozone crisis, highlighting the profound economic disparities between northern and southern European countries. Len is well versed in the complex relationships between the EU and member states, as it is his focus of research, making his commentary on this subject well-informed and accurate. Southern European nations, such as Greece, Spain, and Italy, entered severe recessions and were compelled to adopt stringent austerity measures that aim to reduce government budget deficits through spending cuts, tax increases, or a combination of both. These measures were mandated by wealthier Northern European countries, like Germany, as a prerequisite for their financial bailouts. This dynamic fostered resentment and mistrust, most notably between Greece and Germany, exacerbating existing economic and political divides within the Eurozone. As a result, the Eurozone crisis not only tested the financial resilience of its members, but also exposed and exacerbated deep-seated divisions, challenging the cohesion and solidarity of the European project. Consequently, the Eurozone crisis not only highlighted, but also intensified the disunity across Europe. Peter A. Hall similarly approaches from a third-party perspective as a professor at Harvard, making his commentary less biased as he is not swayed by European identification. He mentions the strategy of subsidizing debt in exchange for implementing austerity measures, which severely hindered economic growth in southern European countries. This approach led to prolonged recessions and high unemployment rates, deepening economic disparities between southern and northern Europe. Despite the European elite's push for deeper integration, the harsh impact of austerity measures diminished public support for such initiatives. Citizens in affected countries perceive these policies as unfair and imposed by distant, unaccountable institutions. This major event lives in the short-term memories of politicians and regular citizens alike, as all worry that something similar may happen again. This growing disillusionment fueled skepticism, with the additional populist movements undermine the legitimacy of the European Union. Consequently, the crisis response not only failed to foster unity, but also worsened divisions, posing a significant challenge to the future of European integration. The long-term political fallout continues to strain the cohesion of the EU as trust between member states and their populations slowly collapses.
The Palestine and Israel conflict has created divisions in the EU. The quote on the left reflects how members of the EU are conflicted about which side to support, as their opinions are constantly shifting as the conflict progresses. If members cannot come to a united decision on the topic of a ceasefire, it could form tensions between members with differing opinions, which could have lasting implications for the unification of Europe. The quote is a first-hand account of the voting process from Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. One of the ways that the EU aims at creating a single identity for all of Europe is through having borders without internal controls. However, the quote on the right explains that the Palestine and Israel conflict has encouraged countries, such as Croatia, to reintroduce border checks because of an increase in migrants and threats of Islamist terrorism. By reintroducing border checks as a country in the EU, the ability to have a united European identity becomes hindered because having open borders is a fundamental idea of the European Union. The source is reliable because the author from Courthouse News Service, Kane Bourdeau, is an EU correspondent for the Courthouse News Service. Therefore, the author can provide a direct account of activities and reactions in the EU. The image on the left is of a poll that reveals 50% of Europeans are in support of banning arms trade with Israel, so Europeans are stiffly divided by the issue of supporting or discouraging Israel. The chart is from the Palestinian Institute for Public Diplomacy, a non-governmental independent institution, and gathered data from people's opinions. The two images on the right are of a protest in support of a ceasefire and a protest in support of Israel, which both took place in London, revealing the division amongst the masses within the same city created by the conflict. These images are first-hand accounts of the protest, with the image on the bottom from BBC and the one on the top from the Times of Israel, which is biased towards the Israeli side, yet still reports on protests supporting the opposite side. This image is of an encampment in the University of Copenhagen in solidarity with Palestine. The younger generations are voicing their support for Palestine, while older authorities are attempting to suppress these protests, which reveals a growing divide between generations in Europe. The source is a first-hand account of the protest through photography by Ritzau Scanpix via Getty Images, verifying that the image is not
In spite of the evidence laid out, some may still suggest that recent generations have given up nationalism in favor for identification with either their race, gender, class, the list goes on. The most notable example being widespread social and political movements, such as the feminist movement, the environmentalist movement, or even pacifist movements. With the rise of social media, this communion between states hundreds or sometimes even thousands of miles away seem to have only exacerbated this phenomenon. Take the environmentalist movement, with protests sprouting in Sweden with Greta Thunberg, to farmers in Ukraine. Although it's important not to ignore how the aftermath of the COVID crisis and its economic consequences have given rise to nationalist movements in Europe. Eastern European countries have especially seen a rise in populist campaigns which advocate for isolationism, anti-immigration sentiments, and also a greater protection of cultural and ethnic norms. In some ways, similar to the rise of fascism in Germany, by taking advantage of the toil of the working class people affected by inflation by way of scapegoating. But the growing influence of nationalism can also be seen in the West, particularly in Great Britain with Brexit, as the United Kingdom decided to exit the European Union in hopes of better control over immigration protocols and border security. Not to mention how groups advocating for social equality are not wholly accepted by the entirety of a state's population, leading to the idea that these mass movements may actually work to increase conflict between states, but not only that, incite more domestic conflict.
Ultimately, Europe will become less unified over the next 30 years because of conflicts in and outside of Europe that have created divisions, doubt, and disunity within the European Union from ideological differences and the social divide between Western and Eastern Europe, and economic crises that impacted countries differently. These events can lead to deep-rooted and lasting tensions that can hinder Europe's ability to have a single identity for all of Europe. Thank you for watching.